There's something in your house right now that you cannot see. Not something dark, not something threatening, something ancient, something assigned, something that has been standing guard over the threshold of your home since the moment you were born. And most people live their entire lives without ever once noticing it is there. I want to tell you about the 3 signs, not the signs you read about in devotional pamphlets, not the comfortable, vague assurances that everything is fine. I am talking about the specific, concrete, verifiable signs documented across centuries of Catholic mystical tradition, confirmed through the accounts of saints who saw with eyes the rest of us have stopped using, that tell you with a precision that should stop you cold whether the angels of God are present and active in your home right now. Because here is what I have learned after decades in this ministry. Most homes are not defended the way their inhabitants believe they are, and most people would not recognize the presence of a guardian angel if it was standing 3 feet away from them. Stay with me through all of this, because what I'm going to share in the next several minutes may be the most clarifying thing you have heard about the spiritual life in years. And I mean clarifying in both directions. It will show you what protection looks like when it is real. And it will force you to ask a very serious question about whether what you currently have in your home qualifies. The world you cannot see. Let me begin with something the modern world has worked very hard to make you forget. The universe is larger than you can perceive. Not in the astrophysical sense, though that is true as well, in the ontological sense. In the sense of what actually exists. The Catholic tradition, drawing from Scripture, from the councils of the Church, from the testimony of the saints across 20 centuries, teaches with absolute clarity that the visible world you inhabit is surrounded by, interpenetrated by, and in constant contact with an invisible world that is neither metaphor nor mythology. It is real. It is populated. And it is paying very close attention to what happens in your home, in your family, and in your soul. The deities are not fairy tale figures. They are not the soft-winged, gender-neutral decorations you find on greeting cards. They are vast, powerful, intelligent beings of pure spirit whose existence predates the creation of the physical universe. When the book of Job describes the sons of God shouting for joy at the laying of the earth's foundation, it is describing beings who were already ancient when the first atom of matter came into existence. And God, in his extraordinary providence, has assigned particular angels to particular human souls. This is not pious speculation. The Church teaches it. Scripture confirms it in the words of Christ himself, who says in the Gospel of Matthew that the little ones have angels in heaven who always behold the face of the Father. Always. Not occasionally. Not when they remember. Always. Your guardian angel has never stopped looking at the face of God on your behalf. That is not a devotional sentiment. That is a theological statement about an ongoing supernatural reality that is happening right now as you sit wherever you are sitting, in whatever condition your soul is in. The question, and this is the question I want you to hold throughout everything I'm about to say, is not whether the angel is there. The question is whether your home has created the conditions in which that angel can work. Because that distinction matters enormously, and almost no one talks about it. What the tradition tells us, I want to take you into territory that the contemporary church rarely visits with any depth, because it makes people uncomfortable. It requires admitting that the spiritual world operates according to principles, that those principles have practical consequences, and that not every home is spiritually equivalent, regardless of what the family believes about themselves. The mystical tradition of the church is precise about this. The saints who had extraordinary access to the invisible world, and I am thinking here of figures like Padre Pio, of Saint Gemma Galgani, of the Cure of Ars, of countless others whose accounts have been examined and ratified by the church across centuries. These individuals did not describe angelic presences uniformly distributed across all environments equally. They described it as responsive. This word matters. Responsive. The angelic presence in a home, the degree to which a guardian angel can operate with full force and full effect in and around the people it is assigned to protect, is not fixed. It is not automatic. It is not independent of the spiritual condition of the home and the souls within it. This is not a cause for despair. I want to be clear about that immediately, because I know how this can be heard. This is not God withdrawing his protection as punishment. God does not work that way. This is more like the difference between a fire that has been given fuel, oxygen, and a proper hearth, and a fire that has been slowly starved of all three. The fire wants to burn. The conditions either help it or hinder it. The angelic mission assigned to each soul wants to be fulfilled. The question is always whether the conditions of a life and of a home is the accurate of the kind that fan the flame or quietly smother it. Now, here's where I need you to understand something that changed the way I look at the cases I have encountered in this ministry. For many years, I approached spiritual warfare primarily from the perspective of threat. What is attacking? What doors have been opened? What ground has the enemy claimed? These are real and urgent questions, and I still ask them. But I have come to understand that there is an equally important frame, and it is the frame of presence rather than absence. Not just what darkness has entered, but also what light is being blocked. Because sometimes the most significant spiritual problem in a home is not that something demonic has moved in. It is that the angelic activity that should be overwhelming, the constant, powerful, grace-saturated ministry of creatures who stand before the face of God, has been reduced to a kind of spiritual whisper in an environment so loud with the world's noise that even a whisper of heaven cannot be heard. And that is exactly what the enemy wants. He does not always need to attack directly. Sometimes he simply needs to fill the space so completely with distraction, with noise, with moral compromise, with the slow erosion of prayer, that the angelic presence in a home goes from a roaring fire to an ember. The family living in that home still has a guardian angel, but they cannot feel it, they cannot perceive it, and they have no idea what they are missing. This is the situation I believe describes the majority of Christian homes in the Western world today. Not possessed, not infested in the classical sense, but spiritually impoverished in a way that leaves them far more vulnerable than they know. So then the three signs. I want to be precise about what I mean when I describe these signs, because I'm not speaking of extraordinary mystical phenomena available only to saints. I am speaking of signs that are accessible to ordinary people living ordinary lives. Signs that the tradition identifies as markers of genuine, active, unobstructed angelic presence in a home. The absence of these signs is not a condemnation, it is a diagnosis, and diagnoses are useful. The first sign, an atmosphere of peace that has no natural explanation. The first sign, and in some ways the most difficult for the modern mind to grasp, precisely because it is so simple, is this, a particular quality of peace. Not the peace that comes from financial security, not the peace that comes from the absence of conflict on any given Tuesday, not the warm feeling you get when the house is clean and dinner is ready and everyone is behaving. Those are natural goods and they are real, but they are not what I am describing. I am describing a peace that persists underneath chaos, a peace that is present during illness, during financial pressure, during the ordinary crushing difficulty of raising a family in a world that seems bent on destroying everything sacred. A peace that people who visit the home sometimes notice before they can name it. A peace that the family itself often cannot fully explain, except to say that in spite of everything, there is something here that holds. The tradition calls this the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, and the apostle describes it precisely that way, as surpassing understanding, because it does not come from circumstances. It comes from proximity to beings who stand permanently in the presence of God. The guardian angel operating freely in a home brings something of heaven's atmosphere with it. This is not romantic language. This is theological precision about what angels are, what they carry, and what their presence does to the spiritual environment around them. St. Thomas Aquinas, working from Scripture and from the tradition before him, describes the angels as participating so fully in the divine beatitude that their very presence communicates something of that beatitude to the souls near them, not in the direct way that God communicates grace, but in a secondary participatory way that the tradition consistently associates with consolation, with spiritual courage, with the particular gift of interior quiet in the midst of exterior disorder. When Padre Pio was asked about his guardian angel, he described the angel's presence with language that people who had spent time near Padre Pio himself would have recognized as analogous to what they experienced near him. A quality of recollection, of depth, of something settling in the soul. Now, why do some homes have this and others do not? This is where the diagnosis becomes important. The atmosphere of supernatural peace is not produced by the mere presence of a guardian angel, because the guardian angel is always present. It is produced by the unobstructed ministry of the guardian angel. And that ministry is obstructed primarily by two things: serious unconfessed sin and the sustained absence of prayer. Let me be careful here because I do not want to create a mechanical picture of grace. Serious sin in a home does not cause the guardian angel to abandon the soul. The angel's love for the soul it is assigned to is real, ordered, and persistent. But serious sin, mortal sin, sin that has severed the soul from the life of grace, creates a spiritual environment in which the angel's ministry, particularly its consoling and protective functions, is significantly hindered. The immortal sin has cut itself off from the primary conduit through which the angel's ministry flows, sanctifying grace. This is not punishment. This is physics, spiritual physics. You cannot receive the benefits of a supernatural reality while simultaneously severing your connection to the supernatural order. The connection is restored through confession. And when it is restored, when a soul returns to the state of grace, the accounts of the saints consistently describe a corresponding renewal of spiritual consolation that they associate directly with the activity of their guardian. The absence of prayer creates a different problem. Prayer is not merely communication with God. Prayer is also in the traditions, understanding the primary way in which a human soul participates consciously in the spiritual order. A home without prayer is a home that has chosen, at least functionally, to operate as if the invisible world does not exist. And a soul that operates as if the invisible world does not exist cannot perceive what is happening within it. The peace is available. The angel is present. But the household has, not through malice but through neglect, and created conditions in which that peace cannot be experienced, cannot be recognized, cannot be received. The first sign of angelic presence, then, is this inexplicable, persistent, underlying peace. And the diagnosis question you must ask yourself is honest and simple. Is that what my home feels like? Not always, not perfectly, but characteristically in its baseline, in what it returns to after disruption. If the answer is no, if what your home characteristically returns to is anxiety, agitation, irritability, a low-grade spiritual restlessness that no amount of entertainment or distraction can fully address, that is not just a psychological observation. That is spiritual information. The second sign, an intuitive awareness of moral danger. The second sign is more precise, and I want to take time with it because I think it is the sign most commonly present but least recognized for what it is. There is a faculty in the human soul that the tradition calls conscience. Most people understand conscience as the voice that tells them when they have done something wrong. That is part of it. But the tradition's account of conscience is richer and more dynamic than post-violation guilt. Conscience, when properly formed and operating in a soul in the state of grace, is also anticipatory. It alerts. It warns. It creates in the soul a kind of unease, a discomfort, a drawing back before the wrong act is committed, not only after. Now, the guardian angel's role in relation to conscience is something that several of the church's theologians have addressed, and the picture that emerges is remarkable. The angel does not speak to the soul in words, ordinarily. The tradition is very consistent on this. Angelic communication with human souls in the ordinary course of providence happens through what the tradition calls illumination of the intellect and movement of the will. Interior promptings that feel to the person receiving them like their own thought, their own instinct, their own sense of something being right or wrong. This is not a recipe for confusion. The mystics are very clear that genuine angelic inspiration is characterized by certain qualities. It is ordered. It is oriented toward God. It is accompanied by a kind of clarity rather than anxiety, and it persists. It does not evaporate the moment you want it to. When a guardian angel is operating freely in a soul that is open to receive it, one of the primary effects is a heightening of this anticipatory moral awareness. The person finds themselves hesitating before they would normally hesitate. They find themselves feeling a particular discomfort about a situation or a content or a relationship that on the surface seems harmless. They find themselves pulled away from certain environments, certain conversations, certain choices by something they cannot fully articulate. Saints describe this in very concrete terms. The curé of Ars, St. John Vianney, described the influence of his guardian angel as the most consistent interior companion of his spiritual life. A presence that operated not through visions or voices, but through the quiet, persistent movement of his attention. The angel kept directing his attention toward God, kept drawing it back when it wandered, kept creating in him a discomfort with everything that was incompatible with God's presence. St. John Vianney also said something remarkable about the relationship between the guardian angel and conscience. He said that the people who confessed to him, who had the most difficulty feeling the promptings of conscience, who had the most trouble distinguishing between what was good and what only seemed good, were almost universally people who had long since stopped listening to the interior movements that their guardian had been sending them consistently for years. They had not lost the angel. They had trained themselves not to hear it. This is the mechanism of spiritual desensitization. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It happens the same way any other form of desensitization happens, through repeated exposure to a stimulus until the stimulus no longer registers. Every time a person feels the interior prompting of their guardian and overrides it, chooses the content anyway, enters the conversation anyway, makes the compromise anyway, the threshold at which that prompting registers rises slightly over years, over decades, over a lifetime of small choices to ignore the angel's movement. The faculty does not disappear. The angel does not stop sending, but the soul has trained itself into a kind of spiritual hearing loss. And the terrifying consequence of this hearing loss is that the soul loses its most important early warning system for moral danger, precisely at the moment in history when the number of threats requiring a functioning early warning system has never been higher. Your children are facing moral dangers that are unprecedented in their speed, their sophistication, and their accessibility. The content that is one click away from a 13-year-old in your home today would have required deliberate, sustained effort to access 25 years ago. The ideological formation happening through the devices in their pockets is happening continuously, relentlessly, and without the natural friction of physical distance and social consequence that once made moral compromise at least effortful. A child whose guardian angel is operating freely and whose conscience has been formed and kept sensitive has an interior warning system capable of navigating that environment. A child whose guardian angel is being consistently ignored, and because the home has no prayer, no sacramental life, no environment in which the interior life is valued and cultivated, that child is navigating the most complex moral landscape in human history with a dead compass. The second sign of active angelic presence in a home is this: a functioning, sensitive, anticipatory moral awareness in the members of that household. Not a legalistic anxiety, not scrupulosity, which is a disorder, not a virtue, but a genuine working capacity to feel the angel's warning before the danger arrives. The question to ask yourself: in your home, do people hesitate? Do they feel things before they can explain them? Do your children come to you and say, "Something felt wrong about that," before they can articulate why? Is there a culture in your household of listening to those interior movements, of taking them seriously, of treating conscience not as an inconvenience to be managed, but as information to be honored? If yes, that is a sign. If not, if the household culture treats interior discomfort as an obstacle to getting what one wants, rather than as potentially divine information, then the angel is still sending but no one is receiving. And that gap is not trivial. The third sign, a pattern of protection that exceeds coincidence.